tell the people, before we can have the answers, we must ask the questions.
I'm here to ask your questions, and tonight our question is observers or meddlers. I don't know if our guests here tonight are meddlers or observers or participants. We'll find out soon enough. We have Mrs. Carmen Guerrero Nakpil, Director of the TRC Technology Resource Center, a writer, journalist, ex-censor, and the mother of Gemma Cruz. And we have from Associated Press, the Bureau Chief, Mr. David Briscoe. I think we should tell the people that Mrs. Briscoe is a Filipina, which should allow you to interfere or intervene a little bit more than usual. Over here, we have the Deputy Minister of Information, Mr. Ronaldo Puno. He is also the Deputy Director General of the Office of Media Affairs. And beside him, Professor Ed Garcia, who teaches Latin American Studies at the Ateneo and Political Science at UP. He's also a director of Kaakbay, which is known as a nationalist organization with a special interest in promoting Philippine sovereignty. Please dial 977-666 or 978261 and join the discussion and tell us whether you think our visitors are meddling or just observing. So let's begin. I think we should ask Mr. Briscoe because he is the he looks like an interventionist. David, you've been covering the visits of the observers from Washington, D.C. From what you've seen and from what you've heard about them from them, how do you size them up?
Well, they came into the Philippines saying that they were going to decide whether or not to observe the election, and my impression was that they had already decided to observe the election. They've now apparently leaning in the direction of sending about 20 Americans over and are trying to get other countries also to participate.
Mm-hmm. What is the stand of the OMA regarding this group? I know that you've been very accommodating with foreign correspondents. And do you think that correspondents are here in the guise of observers, reporters, or are they doing something behind the scenes?
Well, Julie, I think it's important to distinguish between different kinds of observers that we're going to have. There are, of course, the official observers sent by a foreign government or foreign governments who may have an interest of one nature or another in the conduct of the elections in the Philippines. You would have the media observers who certainly do not fall under the same category of an official delegation which will report back to their government. Then you just have the average curious person who will come around. Now, the observers who come on an official basis come as a continuation of, I guess, a process that has been started some time ago. You know, observers may come as representatives of an international organization such as the United Nations, or in some Latin American countries, the Organization of American States, or they may come as representatives of a government who believe that they can assist or support the government by their observing an election. I think that whatever kind we are going to have in the Philippines, the President has already stated that they are welcome to participate in the observation of our elections. Now, these observer groups do not come in, by the way, without criteria. Mm-hmm. They don't come in and just try to find out what's going on, then report back like a journalist would. They have certain established criteria with which they view elections. And you may have read in the paper something about the Weinstein report to the Congress of the United States, where they stipulated 7 suggestions on how the electoral procedures could be improved.
Is this the same as the Center for Democracy?
Yes, that's the one. And then recently we had another group that came in and evaluated again the procedures that will be followed. Both groups went to the United States and said to their Congress that more or less the procedures appeared to be in order. Mm-hmm. And as David has said, it's probable that they will be sending an official observer team. And of course, the policy of the government here is to welcome them.
Mm-hmm. Welcome them because the President himself invited them.
Well, that's true. In an interview aired in the United States some time ago, he did mention that observers would not only be welcome, but they're actually invited to come to the Philippines.
So may I ask Chitang, if that's the case, that the President invited these observers, why are columnists who are friendly with the President or with the administration making it appear that these foreigners should be kicked out, that they should be booted out, that they don't deserve the red carpet that's being rolled out for them?
Are you saying that there is a contradiction in the official policy?
No,
I don't think
not,
there
not in
is.
the official policy. The official policy is to welcome them.
Yes.
But the columnists and editors, editorial writers, who are more or less in the establishment press, seem to think that these foreigners have no business coming in
well,
and
the
watching.
president had to welcome them to make the elections credible. I think that's part of his many acts to show that the elections are honest to goodness, credible elections. But I heard Mr. Bakungan saying this afternoon that the observers are, it's not correct to say that observers are welcome. The correct phrase is to say they are not unwelcome.
All right. What do you
there's a
think?
difference.
I used to read your columns when you were writing about present-day events in the light of history.
Yes,
If you were still writing a column, would you call them meddlers or not unwelcome visitors?
No, well, American meddling and observing has been here since 1898. They have
So
been,
this is nothing
even
new.
before that, they have, in different guises, they have been traders, merchants, politicians, afterwards, yes, invaders, soldiers. So now they're still here, but I think their interest has narrowed down.
To
The only interest of America in the Philippines is really the two American bases. They wouldn't care.
I thought you were going to say their interest is in the two candidates
It's
of
the
the
two
electoral
bases.
campaign.
It's the two bases. They don't really care who wins the election.
As long
The
as-
president could very well be a two-headed hydra as far as they're concerned, as long as the winning candidate can assure them of popular support and of support of the bases. That's all they care about, really.
To protect the bases and preserve
To
them,
keep them,
until forever. Professor Garcia, Mrs. Nakpil mentioned the credibility of the elections, being in the balance. What does the nationalists, what do the nationalists, like your fellow members in Kaakbay, think about this thing of holding a credible election and the election not being credible unless there's somebody from outside telling us that it is credible?
First of all, given the historical track record of the Marcos regime, I think it is fair to say that they are incapable of holding clean, free and fair elections. Therefore, I would like to say that given this fact, there's only one force that can actually make this happen, and it will not be the foreign observers. It will only be the people's vigilance. Even now, I think the odds are very much against the opposition. It is an unequal contest. First of all, there is no equal access to media. Even Commissioner Jaime Opinion, the poll commissioner, said that this rule does not apply to the president, which is the equal access to media principle, which is held in the Omnibus Election Code of 1985. Secondly, the government funds, the government resources and the utilization of public works funds, which is a way to influence not just individuals, but also communities to vote one way or the other. Thirdly, the effective control which government has of the COMELEC, of the election tribunal, of the military, specifically the 12 regional unified commands which hold operational control of the military throughout the country. Therefore, I say it is very important to realize that it is only the people and not really observers from outside. Now, specifically on the observers, I would answer your question in this manner. I think the foreign poll observers could be a double-edged sword. What do I mean by that? My answer would depend on three things. Number one, on the nature of the team of the poll observers. Number two, on the conditions governing their tasks of the delegation. And number three, on the objectives of that team. So in the report I saw today, Associated Press, Dateline, Washington, 16th January, it says that the observers, official observers, will be named by Congress and the White House, and they will be headed by Senator Richard Lugar, Republican Party from Indiana, Chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and Representative Dante Fascial, Chairman of the House Foreign Relations Committee, together with 6 other congressmen and 10 people named by President Reagan And they will be here for 2 days before the election, and then 2 days after, and then they will submit the report to the government. I think this is not acceptable.
Because?
First of all, I do not trust either Senator Richard Lugar or Ronald Reagan to advance the interests of the Filipino people. Perhaps the interest of America, the basis, yes, as was already pointed out, but not the interest of the Filipino people. Secondly, even the chairman of the House Subcommittee on Asian and Pacific Affairs, this is Stephen Solars, he already has refused to be a member of the team, saying that the observers will not be in the Philippines long enough to do any good. In other words, just like what Reverend Jesse Jackson said, no? They can read the text, but without the context, it is simply pretext. And what is the context? And I think it's very important, that is what we should discuss, the context. The context.
I'm sure Deputy Minister Puno would want to react to that right after we take a break, a short break, and we'll be back with our questions. Back to tell the people our question, observers or meddlers. Deputy Minister, would you like to say something about Professor Garcia's observation that the opposition has no chance? I think he's trying to tell you that Marcos Tolentino will win.
Well,
I'm not saying that.
You're not saying that. Because you said the opposition has no
well,
chance.
Ed said so many things, I don't know where to begin to answer him. But he mentioned a lot of the usual horror stories that you hear about the elections in the Philippines, which are the same horror stories we heard before 1984. The elections which were acknowledged to be clean and fair. Now, with respect to the matter of things like, the military interfering, we have General Fidel Ramos supposed to be in charge of the military during this period of the election campaign, and since apparently he has the confidence of many people in the opposition, then I think it's up to them to talk to General Ramos.
You bring up General Ramos. There again is another case of American intervention, because the president himself, when he said General Ver might have to be retired before February 7, he said General Ramos would take over because apparently certain elements, including the United States, think that he can be depended upon. So is that giving into American pressure?
Well, insofar as the elections are concerned, I don't believe that's the case, because the armed forces of the Philippines have been ordered to the barracks. Now, the ones left outside the barracks are the PCINP, who are under the command of General Ramos. That is why the President makes that observation, because anyone outside the command of General Ramos now technically has to belong to the barracks, where they're supposed to stay. So, well, with respect to whether observers actually help or not, as far as the government is concerned, it really doesn't matter. We don't believe that the American observers are here to protect our interests. We think they're here to protect their interests. They are here to make sure that their relationship remains stable before and after the electoral process. I suppose they want to convince themselves of that. And the measure of their success or failure will depend on their objectives.
But why do they make it sound like they want to have a credible election? Otherwise, we will not be getting aid from them. Why does it sound the other way?
Well, we also want to have credible elections, whether or not they give us aid after. But maybe, Julie, we should go back a little bit. All observer teams to elections, whether they were to Guatemala or El Salvador, have a certain interventionist character. And the reason for this is all of this emanated, from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, where participation in political process was said to belong to, the right to participate was said to belong to everyone. And so when they started sending observer teams, it was in the nature of establishing whether or not individuals did indeed have the right to participate in the electoral process, and whether the electoral process properly reflected their views. Now, this is part of what you might call in the United States the liberal democratic agenda. Now, I'm saying it began as something like that, but it evolved into something else, where it became a bipartisan tool or mechanism for trying to assure the American public, and I suppose the legislators, of some aspects of a democracy or a government which they felt they needed some reassurance on. And it is in this context, I think, that this group is coming in here. You will probably note that when this group comes in here, it will be both bipartisan and composed of different branches of government. So what they're trying to do is to come here, get the feel for themselves of what an electoral process in the Philippines looks like, and I suppose to establish also for themselves the degree of unanimity and support that the people will have for the elected leader. So that apparently is their objective, and then they've set certain criteria for this, And the last report was that they believe that the mechanics are in place to produce a clean and fair election. Or otherwise, they would not send an observer team in the first place.
Mr. Puno, do you think that the American observers are here just to find out whether or not it's a fair and clean election, or are they here to ensure that it's a fair and clean election?
Well, that's a very thin line, David. You know, in their manuals, which, by the way, there is a manual for observers, which was prepared under the auspices of the AID. And in those manuals, they say that they are here to try to ensure it by their presence. You know, but this is really a very difficult thing to imagine, because if you're going to have 20 people on an observer team, and how many journalists you're going to have? We have 90,000 precincts, so I don't think that they're going to materially affect our process. I think they're going to materially affect their process in terms of how they convince themselves.
What about this story that the Times Journal carried today, that a fleet of ships will be arriving next week at Subic and placed in the light of all this talk of American pressure, intervention, and meddling, the story assumes a certain sinister character. Does the OMA know about these movements of the U.S. Navy?
Well, you know, Julie, these days many simple things are given a sinister twist. But, you know, American ships come in and out of the Philippines all the time. It's part of our treaty arrangements with them.
But not in this magnitude.
Well, I don't know. If you talk to Mayor Gordon of Olongapo, he will tell you about the numbers that stream into Subic Bay. You know, it is after all a main station for the ships that ply the China Sea. So I don't think that there's anything unusual in that. Besides, you know, that is the largest horror story of all. I mean, sending a flotilla of ships to supervise an election that is conducted thousands of miles away.
The story says these ships will act as escort for the American observers planing in.
Well, you know, David does not need any escort of ships to come here. I don't think that the observers are going to need any such escorts either.
Have you met this group from the Republican and Democratic institutes? Did you get to talk to them? What were they most interested in?
No, I was not. I didn't have the privilege. They had a very tight itinerary, I know, and they did meet, I understand, with many of the key officials in our government. And when the first team arrived, I was still in Washington, so I really didn't get
David,
to
you
meet
met
any of
them. Did you meet them?
Yes, I met them.
What was your impression? And what did they want to know most about?
She didn't like them.
Well, I won't say I didn't like them or I liked them, but what they were most concerned about was the conduct of the election and whether or not they would be able to witness cheating, basically. They wanted to know whether it was going to do any good for them to be here, whether or not they were going to be able to actually see whether or not cheating was occurring. And they were planning to either have 20 or possibly 40 observers. I think the latest indication is they'll have 20. And I think they'd already come to the conclusion that it would be very difficult for them to actually witness
90,000
problems if there were problems occurring. But they seem determined to come in anyway.
But Mrs. Nakpil, you as an observer, although you're in the government, you're looking at it from 2 points of view. Can somebody like Senator Lugar or Congressman, whatever, come in here, talk to Filipinos, stay around for 1 week, and be able to grasp just what this whole complex and complicated electoral process is all about, considering the culture, the society, etc. of the people?
Considering the culture, no.
They won't.
No, they won't be able to tell. They can't tell now. You can tell from the stories, with all due respect to the Associated Press, you can tell from all the stories the foreign correspondents write
That
they don't understand the culture.
What is it that leaves them cold in understanding our culture? Like you said, they've been here since 1898.
It's a very complex culture, and Americans imagine that everybody is like them. So that's the first difficulty.
David, is that true?
Yes. No, it is. I agree completely. Of course, I don't know that I understand American culture either. I mean, cultures are a very complicated thing to understand. I wonder if some of these things don't go a little bit beyond culture, though, when it comes to elections. There is a perception that President Marcos has a better organization, a stronger organization, and that his people out in the field have been able to
I don't think that's true.
You think the opposition has a better organization
Yes.
than President Marcos?
Yes, I
Really?
think so.
How come? Everybody says that KBL is
I
well-oiled.
don't get that impression at all.
Why did you get that impression, David?
Well, President Marcos has won 3 presidential elections, and I don't know. I'm saying that there's a perception that President Marcos has tremendous advantages in the election, and I think Mr. Garcia outlined some of the advantages that he believes he has. I think beyond that, the very fact that he's the incumbent gives him a tremendous advantage. Now, Minister Tolentino told the Kapihan last week that the opposition seems to have more money than the president. And the reaction in the room was a series of hoots and gasps. and looking around Manila, it's very difficult to conclude that the opposition has more money. Could I ask Mr. Puno a question? I wonder if, to what degree the Office of Media Affairs is involved in the election, and how you justify your role with regards to the election.
Well, there are 2 kinds of government officials, those who are political appointees and those who are career bureaucrats. The political appointees, by the nature of their being political appointees, do participate in these processes. Now, as the office as a whole, I think, is meant to just service the foreign correspondents today. It's not meant to be the propaganda arm of the administration or anything of that nature. I think that what we will try to do in the coming weeks ahead, and what we have been trying to do, is to work towards the servicing of the foreign journalists who are coming here, feeding the press releases of the Commission on Elections to the correspondents who are interested in the subjects, and as the weeks come in, to try to conduct briefings, I suppose, with all journalists on matters of common interest.
I sometimes get the feeling that OMA is very much interested in pampering the foreign press. It's easier for the foreign press to get an interview with the president.
Well, I really can't say one way or the other, Julie. I know that, we have a presidential press staff that is there almost all the time. And insofar as the foreign journalists are concerned, I'm sure many of them would dispute your belief that they are pampered, because I don't think there are that many foreign journalists, frankly, who have been able to get to interview everyone that they want to interview. There are about 250 here today. We expect far more than this by the time the elections come around. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to prepare an elaborate process of trying to service all these many people who are coming here. The 3 main networks of the United States are coming over. There are already so many newspaper chains who have sent representatives here. We find that their interest in our elections is really very great, and we're very happy about this.
Maybe we can ask Professor Garcia, why this unusual interest in the Philippines these days? From your studies of third world countries?
Well, first of all, it is very clear that in the Philippines there is a crisis, economic, political, and moral. In fact, in political science, you would say it's an organic crisis of state. The old order is dying, but the new cannot be born. That's why I would like to clarify a point that you mentioned earlier. I think here, more than foreign observers, more than anything else, what can vanquish fraud really here?
From the elections?
Yes, what can vanquish fraud in the elections would be the people's freedom from fear. That is why, for me, the most important thing really is the organized citizens, to be involved, people's involvement. Number 2, vigilance during the day of the election and in the aftermath of the election. And thirdly, sustained mobilization and explore all forms of resistance so that the people's will prevail.
So your group is
that, for me, is the most important thing. Now, regarding foreign observers, I have my own thoughts there. I mean, I would say that there must be certain conditions fulfilled. In other words, it should be first international in character and non-governmental. Secondly, they must have perfect freedom. In other words, they must see the entire political context, the entire picture, not just the day of the election itself, because that's only an instant in the entire political framework. And the freedom to go where they will, because the fraud will be committed not in the cities. It will be committed in the outlying districts, for example, of Cadiz, where there is a political warlord who has been already granted, a gift after Escalante, Negros del Norte. It will also occur in the fiefdom of Danao, where Durano rules. Lanao del Sur, Lanao del Norte, where there are at least 700 ghost barangays were in one town, last Batasan elections, for example.
How are we able
For
to count
example,
them if they're ghosts?
this is data that I was able to get regarding the towns
my point that they're
in Lanao del
better
Sur.
organized.
In the municipality of Manungan, where there are only 7,000 registered voters out of a total population of 7,000 registered voters in the last Batasan elections, or municipality of Salvador, Lanao del Sur, where out of a population of 9,000, more than 12,000 voters during the last election.
Have you reported these facts to the COMELEC?
Yeah, this is taken from our dailies, newspapers.
Well,
And I think that it is the duty of the COMELEC to really make that known. And thirdly, the third data condition for international observers must be they must make the report public and made known to the nation, to the world. And these international poll observers, I would suggest, should be composed of human rights activists, legal experts, including foreign correspondents who will represent many nations. For example, the International Commission of Jurists, or the Pax Christi, or the Comisión Internacional de Droits de l'Homme. So I suggest these are the kind of commissions, and not the U.S. government.
Not just the U.S. alone. Now, but in the light of all this talk about pressure, it would seem that even before the elections are going to be held, there are already certain circumstances which point to actual U.S. pressure having been successful. Like when they said NAMFREL must be the citizens' arm of the Commission on Elections. NAMFREL was made the citizens' arm nationwide against I think the wishes of many people in the COMELEC. They said the UNIDO should be the dominant opposition party. And it came out that way, that the UNIDO got the DOP status. Then they said, we want the military to be neutral. So the president announces General Ver's forthcoming retirement, etc. It would seem that everything that the Americans want, even if they don't come in to observe the elections, has already been in place.
Well, Julie, actually, the requirements stipulated by the so-called American teams that came over here were actually statements on motherhood. You know, NAMFREL was already accredited in the last elections, and it seemed that they would really be equipped to do what they intended to do. The UNIDO is obviously the only opposition party of national character, and that was the condition for accreditation. With respect to the other instances, you will find that there were statements made before even the elections were announced, relative, for example, to the military reform. Now, you know, I'm very tempted to go into an itemized rebuttal of what Ed Garcia has been saying. But, you know, I think following his call for vigilance, we should not talk about it on the television. We should go to the COMELEC and make representation so that these instances will actually be remedied.
What he is saying is that the COMELEC should act on such reports of flying voters. They should not wait for people to go there and say, will you please do something about
Sure,
this?
but, you know, you're assuming first that they're not doing anything about it. Second, we are assuming that they have an instrument of knowing everything. You know, of course, in the cases where they are familiar with the instances where there are irregularities, if it is proven that they're not performing their duty, then we will be justified in saying something against them. I think it is dangerous at this time to try to cast doubt on the institutions which we are using to supervise these exercises that we are all participating in. Now, if they are so dead set on their opinions, their negative opinions with respect to our institutions, I don't see why they participated in the elections in the first place. Now, it is self-congratulatory to say that it is their vigilance and their good efforts that are going to be the sole force that are going to carry a clean and peaceful election. Many of us in the government, of course, have remained silent about comments of this nature. We understand the atmosphere and the situation in which such comments are made. But we too desire a clean and honest election. We are also repelled by acts of dishonesty. We do not favor anyone to take undue advantage of the opposition. And I think that it is not fair for the opposition to make a blanket accusation of the entire Filipino people and the government. In fact, I think that when they do this, they lend credence to what some people are saying, that they are already preparing the groundwork for what they themselves believe already will become a loss. Since in their own surveys, I read in the newspapers that they say that they are not very optimistic. But I think that they should not allow this exercise to degenerate into a criticism of the COMELEC when it should remain what it is, a battle for the people's minds, a comparison of the two candidates, and let us leave the institutions, particularly the constitutional commissions that are running these things, alone and give them a benefit of a doubt. And if we have any doubts about which we are certain, it is our obligation and responsibility not to bring it to public fora where nothing can be done, but to the fora where they can be remedied.
Would the COMELEC entertain them in
Oh, I'm
private?
sure. You know, with respect to these flying voters that Ed has been mentioning, this is precisely one of the matters for which COMELEC undertook an exercise. Now, I wonder if people who are complaining about such things went to the COMELEC even once to find out whether the things they're talking about in other places are actually being acted upon in the Commission on Elections. And if they are not, then they can certainly bring the case up before the Commission on Elections.
We'll come back right after these reminders.
This is Helen Vela.
That will be worthy of the people's
Would those
trust.
safeguards have been in place if the United States had not been making such great noises about clean, fair, and credible elections?
Oh yes, definitely, because you know the matter of observers on both from both parties has been a time-honored tradition in our electoral process. It's not as if we invented the electoral procedures yesterday. We have had elections many times since the post-war period, and actually there has been a gradual process of evolution where we tried to arrive at new processes. Now, admittedly, during the martial law years, there was a different set of election mechanics in place, and then upon the lifting of martial law, they slowly went back to the old procedures that we used to have. And I think that what we have today is an improvement, really, over many of the other provisions in the former electoral codes that we used to have. And it's I think that the enactment of such procedures is a sign that really we are trying to improve the system.
And
Excuse me, do we send poll observers to the elections in the United States? Do we send poll observers to other nations? No, because there is no credibility here. There is nearly no legitimacy. For me, a sovereign government with some sense of national dignity cannot allow another government to pass judgment on whether its elections are free or fair, unless
Are they
it is
passing
subservient,
judgment?
unless it is subservient or it is forced to do so. And I feel here the U.S. government as an observer is not disinterested. It is its own interest to protect the bases, as was mentioned earlier, its foreign investments and foreign loans. I think the best thing the United States government can do is to leave us alone, allow the Filipinos to work out our own destiny. That is the best thing they can do.
can we do that to the United States, David? Can you tell that to the American government?
Can you tell the American government
To leave us alone.
to leave the Philippines alone? Probably not. But I think Mr. Garcia has made an interesting point. He's made an interesting point.
If there were no basis, perhaps they would be interested.
What point?
Well, the Americans are here for their own interest. There's no doubt about that, and they'll certainly acknowledge it. It's the first thing that they do acknowledge. But the question is whether they're here because they wish to see President Marcos's government legitimatized, or whether they're here because they wish to see some sort of a transition from President Marcos's government to some other government, or in other words, to see President Marcos defeated. And I'd just like to ask Mr. Puno or Mr. Garcia to respond to the question as to why the observers are really here.
I think the U.S. government is trying to put its political eggs in different electoral baskets to ensure that their interests continue prevail, no matter who wins.
So that whoever wins
Whoever
will
wins.
think that America supported him or her.
Because you remember, in international relations, there are no permanent friends, only permanent interests. It's fine if they protect their interests, but we must protect ours, because nobody else will.
Would you like to answer David Briscoe's question, Mr. Puno?
Well, really speaking for the government, I think that it is immaterial to the Philippine government what their intentions are. I think in so
But
far
why
as
do we welcome them? That's the point.
because we are an open nation and we want to improve our relations with the international community as best we want. Now, let us remove the impression that this is a peculiar exercise that was specifically engineered for the Philippines. Perhaps I stayed in Washington, D.C. too long, but I know that there are many such groups that go to various countries where the United States has a particular interest. And of course, as everybody knows, because of our position in Southeast Asia and our role in regional security, there is a great interest in the Philippines. Now,
if this were such a unique exercise, they wouldn't be coming up with such things as, guidelines for international election observing as a project of the AID. And by the way, Ed was mentioning a group earlier. One of them, I think, was the International Human Rights Group.
Do you think the Americans honestly don't care how the election turns out?
Well, let's put it this way. I really don't care whether they care. As far as I'm concerned, if we can conduct a clean and honest election and reflect the will of the people, that is all we are interested in.
All right, let's go to our viewers' questions from Regina Tarosa for Mrs. Nakpil. You've written previously that the Philippines would have a revolution in 10 years. Has the time come?
I don't remember having said that, but I'll have to look up my files.
For Professor Garcia from Dr. Crispin Fernandez, why do you think that the Filipino people are a bunch of idiots and morons to allow what you claim to be a dying government to persist, and that the opposition seems to have a monopoly of God's given virtues?
That's why right now there is an awakening. For a long time, I think the culture of silence and culture of fear was prevalent in this land. But I think, in a sense, Dinoy Aquino accomplished in death what he could never have accomplished in life, to tell people that their lives are not their own. And that's why people are fighting now, vigilant, to make sure that this election is credible, that this election is free and fair, that the people's will prevail.
Before we go back to our panel, I'd like to show you some taped interviews that we did with 2 KBLs and 2 oppositionists. These are Mayor Pablo Cuneta, KBL, Attorney Jose Erestain, opposition, Emilio Bunoan, KBL, Tony Tamayo, opposition. Let's hear what they have to say about the observers.
The way I see things going on in Metro Manila, I feel that these foreigners are siding with a certain party. Of course not with the KBL, but with the other party, with the UNIDO. That's only my own opinion. So I say that it's both meddlers and observers.
It all depends upon one's perspective, no? First of all, to some, it is not an intervention because the president himself invited these Americans to become observers. Now, besides, we cannot do anything about the situation. First of all, the Americans have already invested so much here, so they are entitled to at least see to it that the government that is handling the Philippine country will be very credible. So, we can also think of the fact that 2 or 3 days ago, Mr. Marcos has said so, that Americans wanted General Ramos to handle the peace and order situation during the elections. And that is the reason why perhaps General Ver would be retired before the elections. So even the president is allowing the intervention of the American government.
I've been hearing reports and reading our daily newspaper that there are some millions of dollars coming in supposedly to support the opposition. And again, if this is true, this is I consider this interference. In fact, I have also received report that the CIA is supporting the NAMFREL, which is supposed to be neutral in this election. If again this is true, this is a blatant form of interference, and they should not be doing this. We will have to do something to protect the interest of our people and the integrity of our country.
And why not satisfy this? Why take the issue as meddling or what? Why not just get through with it, let the observers come over, and if the president, if Ferdinand Marcos wins, the more credible he will become. Because, you see, he can proudly claim that, look, even in spite of the observers, and you claim that we are going to cheat. Here they are telling you that there was never cheating done in this election. The better for him. So why not call it? On the other hand, the opposition will also once and for all satisfy themselves that, look, this is it. Okay. Now, if the opposition wins, then again, the better for everybody, because the conscience of the people have been expressed through the casting of the ballots, and that they believe change is necessary. And so they voted in favor of Cory Aquino.
Thank you. So there you see, we practice equal time here on Tell the People. We have a question here for David from Mr. Bong Petolver. Who do you think is paying for all the expenses of our visitors?
I have no idea. I understand that they're saying that they're independent observers. I really don't know who's paying for their...
Would you know, Mr. Puno?
Well, insofar as the observers we have been talking about are concerned, I believe the U.S. Congress is paying for it. They do have a policy insofar as observer teams that they accept nothing from the governments or the countries where they conduct their observation tours.
From Rolando Ledesma, maybe Chitang can answer this. What are the implications of the Batasan resolution about to declare Bosworth a persona non grata? Do you think that would prosper in the Batasan?
I don't think so. I don't know.
You know, because the resolution, I think, will be coming from Minister Perez, and that means the KBL by force of numbers. Would it prosper at all?
No, I don't think it's even in session. It's not in session.
It's not in session.
So.
Maybe it depends on who wins the election.
Won't the Batasan be convening until after the election? Well, not before?
I understand that's what's going to happen. Well, you know, again, you will have many resolutions filed by many KBL members. And I don't believe that anytime a KBL member files a resolution, we should all get excited and presume it will become a law. And that's probably his own opinion. And I know that even within the party, there will be differences of opinion on that point.
How do you like Ambassador Bosworth?
Me, personally? I don't know him personally that well, but I think that he is a very capable man. I think.
Very capable at meddling or at not meddling?
Well, you know, he is a very capable ambassador for his country.
From Jose de Luna, for anyone on the panel, are these observers really observers or CIA agents? Chitang.
I haven't met any of them, and I haven't seen their accreditations. Quite possible.
Well, this Lansdale that I keep reading about in the columns of Philosopho Tasio, what was his role here in the Magsaysay elections, and what was his cover? Was he a journalist or a writer or what?
Yes, he was, I think, head of a radio station. He was a journalist. I met him as a journalist.
Yes?
Because I read the AP report, and it said there will be 6 congressmen and 10 people appointed personally by Ronald Reagan.
Including university presidents.
Exactly, and that's why I'd like to make a comment to what Tony Tamayo said on television. I really believe this is a Damocles sword, because in El Salvador, where there were also U.S. poll observers, they were there, and they, without understanding the total context, the country is nearly at war. And most of the opposition were not able to participate, and you had the U.S. poll observers legitimizing the Salvadorian process, and I think that's dangerous. That's why I say it's a Damocles sword. I mean, it's a double-edged sword. No? Can cut both ways.
Julie, what will legitimize our elections? It's not any report that the international observers will make, but the vote of the people.
Exactly. I mean, it's the people's whatever. In a sense, if the people feel that their will is frustrated, we will see that.
But in the final analysis, it's the Batasan that will declare the winners, right? The winners.
They will canvass, yes, they will be the...
So would people like Ed Garcia's group accept the declaration by the Batasan of the final outcome of the elections?
I think we will have to watch this step very closely, and that's why I say...
it's the people.
Exactly, I mean, the vigilance of the people throughout the country at the polls will really determine very much what the real results will be.
I think we know who Ed's candidate is already.
We will be right back after we take our next